I've always prided myself on being prepared, especially when it comes to long drives. Having to travel for work so often, I know the importance of keeping my car fueled and my route planned out, especially when driving through those long stretches of highway where gas stations are few and far between. But last month I made the mistake of not paying attention, and that mistake led me to an encounter I'll never forget. It was a Friday night, and I was returning home after visiting some clients in a rural part of the state. The drive was about 4 hours, and I had left later than I'd intended, which meant most of the trip was going to take place in the dark. The highway I was on stretched for miles through forests and empty plains, with nothing in sight but the occasional signpost. As the night wore on, I zoned out, listening to the low hum of the radio and letting my mind wander. That was when I noticed the fuel gauge. It was lower than I expected, dangerously low in fact. The little light had just come on and I cursed under my breath. I must have burned more fuel than I thought getting through the mountain passes earlier, and now I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no clear idea of how far the next gas station was. My GPS hadn't been loading properly for the last hour, thanks to the spotty reception in the area. I was just hoping I'd come across a gas station soon. Luck seemed to be on my side because about 10 minutes later, I spotted a small flickering neon sign up ahead, one of those gas station signs that looks like it hasn't been updated since the 80s. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. I pulled in, grateful I hadn't had to call for roadside assistance. The place was run down, just like I expected. The lights over the pumps flickered and the pavement was cracked and full of weeds. The station itself was a small building that looked like it had seen better days, decades ago. There were no other cars in sight, save for one old, rusted sedan parked near the farthest pump. The guy standing next to it caught my eye immediately. He was tall and lanky, with messy dark hair poking out from beneath a dirty baseball cap. His clothes looked worn and grimy, like he'd been on the road for weeks without a change. He was leaning against the pump, not moving, just staring at me as I pulled into the station. It was the kind of stare that made my skin crawl, a dead-eyed gaze, like he was sizing me up for something. I kept my distance, pulling into a pump a few spaces away. I got out and tried to act normal, but I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. I avoided looking back at him, focusing on the task at hand, fueling up my car and getting the hell out of there. "Late night, huh?" the man said suddenly, his voice cutting through the stillness. His tone was low, almost lazy, but there was something off about it. "Yeah," I muttered, keeping my answer short. I didn't want to engage with him any more than I had to. He didn't say anything else after that, just continued watching me. I glanced over at him briefly, and he gave me a slow, unsettling smile. It wasn't a friendly one. It was the kind of smile that set off alarm bells in my head, like he knew something I didn't. I finished fueling up as fast as I could and climbed back into my car. As I drove off, I looked in the rearview mirror, and he was still standing there, staring after me. I told myself it was just some weird encounter. People are strange sometimes, especially in the middle of nowhere. I tried to shake it off as I got back on the highway, but the more I drove, the more uneasy I felt. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't stop thinking about the way that guy had looked at me, like he knew something was about to happen. I was driving for about another 2 hours, everything seeming fine, when my fuel gauge started to dip again. I froze, staring at it in disbelief. It didn't make sense. I had just filled up my tank, and now it was almost empty again. I checked my dashboard, wondering if something was wrong with the car, but everything seemed normal. Panic started creeping in. I couldn't be running out of fuel again. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't remember seeing any signs for another gas station in this stretch of the highway. But sure enough, within a few more miles, the little fuel light blinked back on. I had no choice but to hope another gas station would appear soon. And then, as if someone had heard my silent prayers, I saw it, a gas station sign glowing faintly up ahead. My relief was short-lived as I pulled in and realized something was wrong. The station looked exactly like the one I had just left hours ago. The same cracked pavement, the same flickering lights, and the same run-down building. It was uncanny. It was as if I had driven in a circle, but I knew I hadn't. There was no way I could have ended up back at the same place. And then I saw him. Leaning against a different pump, but in the exact same posture, was the same man. The same dirty baseball cap, the same grimy clothes, and the same cold, unnerving gaze. His car was different this time, a beat-up truck, but it was definitely him. My heart started racing. I parked my car but didn't get out immediately. How was he here? It didn't make any sense. I had driven for hours since the last station, and there was no way he could have gotten here before me, let alone been waiting in the exact same way. I hesitated, but I couldn't just sit there. My car was almost out of fuel and I had no other options. With shaking hands, I stepped out and approached the pump, keeping my head down and trying to ignore him. This time he didn't say anything. He just watched me, his eyes following my every movement. I could feel his stare burning into the back of my skull, and my pulse quickened with every second that passed. The air around me felt colder, and I could see my breath fogging up, even though it was the middle of summer. I wanted to run, to get back in my car and leave, but I needed to fuel up. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the nozzle into the tank. When I finally finished, I turned to rush back to my car, and he was right there, standing just a few feet away. "You can't run forever," he whispered, his voice low and menacing. His smile widened, showing teeth that were yellow and uneven. I didn't respond. I just bolted from my car, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart was pounding in my chest as I floored the gas pedal, speeding away from the station as fast as I could. But as I drove down the empty highway, I glanced at the fuel gauge. It was already dropping again. And somehow I knew, deep down, I'd see him at the next station too. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway, a weekend escape from the chaos of our lives. My girlfriend Lily and I had been planning this road trip for weeks. We packed our bags, loaded up the car with snacks, and set off on a Friday evening, the sun dipping below the horizon as we made our way through the winding back roads of upstate New York. As the night settled in, the world outside our car turned dark and quiet. The radio played softly in the background, and we sang along to our favorite songs, laughing and sharing stories, letting the stress of our daily lives fade away. The highway stretched out before us, lined with tall trees that seemed to loom like silent sentinels in the darkness. A few hours into our drive, we noticed the gas gauge creeping dangerously close to empty. "We should stop soon," I said, glancing at Lily, who was scrolling through her phone in the passenger seat. "Yeah, good idea," she replied, looking up with a smile. "I'll keep an eye out for the next gas station." After another 30 minutes of driving, we finally spotted a flickering sign in the distance: gas, food, restrooms. I let out a sigh of relief. It was a small, dimly lit station tucked away in the woods, the kind you'd expect to see in a horror movie. The building looked worn down, with peeling paint and a rusted roof. But we needed fuel, so I pulled into the lot, the crunch of gravel beneath the tires echoing in the stillness. As we stepped out of the car, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and the faint hum of the neon sign buzzed overhead. The gas pumps were old, their lights flickering as if they were struggling to stay alive. I shook off the feeling and grabbed the fuel nozzle, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. Lily wandered inside the small convenience store, the bell above the door jingling as she entered. I watched her disappear, feeling a mix of anxiety and apprehension. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place. As I pumped gas, I glanced around the lot. It was deserted, no other cars in sight. A shiver ran down my spine and I instinctively glanced over my shoulder. That's when I saw him, a figure leaning against the far side of the building, half hidden in the shadows. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a tattered flannel shirt and jeans. His hair was unkempt, and he wore a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. I tried to focus on filling my tank, but the man's presence gnawed at my nerves. He stood completely still, just watching. A minute passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring right at me. I hastily finished pumping the gas, my hands trembling slightly as I replaced the nozzle. I stepped away from the pump, ready to join Lily inside, when the man suddenly pushed off the wall and started walking toward me. My heart raced, and I instinctively took a step back. "Hey there, buddy," he called out, his voice raspy and low. "You got a minute?" I forced a smile, trying to appear friendly despite the unease coiling in my gut. Yeah, what's up?" "Just wanted to say you should be careful out here," he said, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. "Not a lot of folks come out this way. Strange things happen in the woods at night." I swallowed hard, glancing back at the store where Lily was. "Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. Thanks for the heads up." The man chuckled, a low, unsettling sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're welcome. Just look out for each other, okay? You never know who you can trust." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there for a moment, frozen, before finally turning to head inside the store. Lily was at the counter, chatting with an older woman who was behind the register. She looked up as I approached, a smile lighting up her face. "Hey, did you see the weird guy outside?" she asked, her voice playful. I forced a laugh, but my stomach churned. Yeah, I just talked to him. He seemed strange. The woman behind the counter, who looked like she hadn't slept in days, raised an eyebrow. That's Jack. He's been coming around here for years. Just ignore him. He's harmless. Mostly. Mostly? I repeated, glancing toward the door. The man had vanished from sight, but the unease lingered. Yeah, he just likes to hang around and talk to travelers, Lily said, brushing it off. Let's get some snacks and get back on the road. We picked out a few bags of chips and drinks, the old fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. As we approached the register, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The store felt cramped, the shelves looming around us like walls closing in. As the woman rang up our snacks, I noticed a small bulletin board behind her filled with flyers for missing pets and people. A few of the faces looked familiar, as if they were from news stories I'd seen, but the thought slipped away as the woman finished ringing us up. Here you go, sweethearts. That'll be $8.75, she said with a tired smile. I fished out my wallet and paid, eager to leave the unsettling atmosphere behind. Thanks, I said, grabbing the bags. As we walked back to the car, I glanced around, half expecting to see Jack lurking nearby. Let's just get back on the road, I urged, trying to shake the anxiety gripping me. Yeah, let's, Lily agreed, her voice a little more subdued. We climbed into the car, and I started the engine, the sound breaking the heavy silence. As we pulled away from the gas station, I stole a glance in the rearview mirror. The last thing I saw before the trees obscured the view was Jack, standing in the parking lot, watching us leave. The road stretched out ahead, and for a while, the tension eased. We drove in silence, both lost in our thoughts. Just when I thought the moment had passed, the atmosphere shifted again. The air felt charged, electric, and the night outside grew even darker, as if we were being swallowed by shadows. Do you feel that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Feel what? Lily replied, looking concerned. Like, something's off. I can't explain it. Lily frowned, glancing at me with worry in her eyes. Maybe we just need to talk about something else. How about we play a game? Sure, like what? I asked, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. Let's play 20 questions. You ask me something, and I'll ask you back. Okay, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. What's your biggest fear? She thought for a moment before answering. I'd say losing you or something happening to us while we're out here. What about you? Being lost in the woods at night, I replied honestly, thinking of the darkness that surrounded us. After a few rounds of questions, I felt the tension start to ease, but then I glanced at the fuel gauge again. It was dangerously low. We should have filled up more, I muttered. I know, Lily said, her voice soft. There's got to be another gas station coming up soon, right? As if to mock my concerns, the engine sputtered. Panic surged through me. No, not now. The car began to slow and I guided it to the side of the road. Great, I said, frustration boiling over. Just great. Should we try calling someone? Lily asked, biting her lip. I glanced at my phone, but there was no signal. No service, I said, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. We're stuck. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our situation sinking in. Then I noticed something in the distance, a faint light flickering through the trees. Hey, look, that might be another gas station. I pointed, my heart racing with hope. Let's check it out, Lily said, her eyes brightening. We hopped out of the car and started walking toward the light, the night air growing colder with each step. As we got closer, I felt that familiar unease creeping back. The light was coming from another small gas station, much like the last one we had visited, but this one looked even more run down. The neon sign buzzed, casting eerie shadows that danced around us. Are you sure about this? Lily asked, hesitating at the entrance. We don't have a choice, I replied, pushing the door open. The bell jingled and we stepped inside. The store was empty, the shelves dust-covered and sparsely stocked. An old man sat behind the counter, his eyes clouded and distant. Help you folks? He asked, his voice gruff. We need gas, I said, glancing around. Is the pump working? He shrugged. Might be, might not. Can't keep track of it all these days. I exchanged a worried glance with Lily. Can you turn it on? The man grunted, standing up slowly and shuffling toward the back. As he walked away, I felt a sense of foreboding. Maybe we should just go, I whispered to Lily, who nodded in agreement. But before we could turn to leave, we heard a rustling sound outside, followed by a series of loud thuds. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. A dark figure loomed near our car, rifling through the bags we'd left on the back seat. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. The figure turned, and for a brief moment I saw his face, a man with wild eyes and a manic grin. He lunged toward the door, and I stumbled back, grabbing Lily's arm. "Run!" I yelled. We bolted for the exit, bursting out into the cold night air. I could hear footsteps pounding behind us, the man hot on our heels. "Get in the car!" I screamed, shoving Lily toward the passenger side. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking as I managed to unlock the doors. We jumped inside, and I slammed the door shut just as the man reached us, banging his fists against the window. "Start the car! Start the car!" Lily cried, her voice frantic. I turned the key in the ignition, praying it would work. The engine roared to life, and I backed out of the parking lot, barely glancing at the man still trying to get inside. I drove like a man possessed, the tires screeching as I hit the gas and sped down the dark road. As we left the gas station behind, I felt the tension begin to ebb, but the sense of dread remained, a shadow lurking just outside of my vision. "What the hell was that?" Lily gasped, shaking with adrenaline. "I don't know," I said, my heart racing. "But we need to get out of here." We drove for what felt like hours, the night stretching endlessly before us, but eventually we spotted the glowing lights of another town in the distance. I sighed in relief as we entered the familiar streets, the fear slowly fading away. As we parked outside a diner, I turned to Lily. "Let's grab a bite and calm down. I think we could use it." "Definitely," she said, taking a deep breath. "Just, let's not talk about what happened back there." As we walked inside, the familiar smell of coffee and fries filled the air. The diner was nearly empty, with only a few scattered patrons enjoying their meals. I felt a sense of safety wash over me, and we settled into a booth, grateful to be out of danger. But as I glanced out the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. The night felt heavy, as if the darkness outside had eyes of its own, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. In that moment, I realized our escape from the gas station might have been just the beginning. It was Saturday night, and I was pumped. My buddy Rob had scored us an invite to the biggest party of the year. I had my best outfit on, the music blaring in my car, and I was feeling good. I had everything set, except for gas. The needle on my fuel gauge had dipped dangerously close to empty, and I had to make a quick stop before heading to the party. I spotted a gas station up ahead, a flickering neon sign buzzing in the darkness. It looked like one of those old, run-down places you wouldn't usually stop at, but I didn't have time to be picky. I pulled in, the tires crunching on gravel as I parked beside the lone pump. The station was eerily quiet, with just one dim light above the entrance. The place gave off a bad vibe, but I shrugged it off. After all, I wasn't planning on sticking around long. I got out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. As I grabbed the nozzle and started pumping gas, I glanced around. The station was surrounded by thick woods, with only the faint hum of the pump breaking the silence. There wasn't another car or person in sight, and the station itself looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. As the pump clicked, signaling the tank was full, I walked toward the small convenience store to pay. The glass door squeaked as I pushed it open, and the inside of the shop was even creepier than the outside. The lights flickered overhead, and the shelves were sparsely stocked with dusty snacks and expired drinks. Behind the counter stood an old man with deep-set eyes and a gaunt face. He watched me with an unsettling intensity. "Just paying for gas," I said, trying to sound casual. The old man didn't say a word. He just stared, his eyes never leaving mine as I placed a $20 bill on the counter. His silence made my skin crawl, but I forced a smile and turned to leave. That's when I noticed something strange. My car keys, usually in my pocket, were missing. I patted my jacket, my jeans, even checked the counter where I'd been standing. Nothing. They were gone. Did I drop my keys in here?" I asked, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. The old man still didn't respond. His lips twitched slightly, as if he was holding back a smile. Something about his expression made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I quickly retraced my steps to the pump, scanning the ground. Nothing. I walked back to the counter, my patience wearing thin. "Look, I'm kind of in a hurry. Did you see my keys or not?" This time the old man spoke, his voice raspy and low. "Sometimes things disappear out here. Things that ain't meant to leave." "What?" I asked, taken aback. "What are you talking about?" Before he could answer, the door behind me jingled as it opened. I spun around and saw a man standing in the doorway, his face half hidden in the shadow. He was dressed in all black, with a hood pulled over his head. He didn't look like someone here to buy gas. Something about him screamed trouble. "Need a ride?" the man asked, his voice casual but with an edge that made me uneasy. His eyes flicked to my car and then back to me, like he already knew I was stranded. "Nah, I'm good," I said quickly, trying to hide my growing panic. "Just looking for my keys." The man stepped closer, his grin widening. "Doesn't look like you'll be finding them anytime soon. How about I give you a lift?" "It's a party, right? You wouldn't want to miss it." My stomach twisted. How did he know about the party? I hadn't mentioned it to anyone here. I took a step back, glancing at the old man behind the counter, but he just stood there, watching the interaction like it was some kind of sick game. "No thanks," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll figure it out." The man's grin faltered, and something dark flashed in his eyes. "Suit yourself," he muttered, but there was a dangerous edge to his voice now. He turned and walked back outside, disappearing into the shadows at the edge of the gas station. I let out a shaky breath, hoping that was the end of it. I just needed to get out of here, keys or no keys. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Rob. "Dude, you okay? The party's insane. Where are you?" I quickly typed back. "Stopped at a gas station. Lost my keys. Super sketchy guy just showed up." Rob's reply came almost instantly. "Which station?" I looked around for a sign, but there was nothing to indicate the name of the place. I told him I'd send him my location, but just as I was about to hit send, I heard something. A faint sound, like the crunch of footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. The man in the hoodie was standing there again, only this time he wasn't alone. 3 more figures emerged from the shadows, all dressed in dark clothing, their faces hidden. They moved closer, surrounding me, cutting off any chance of escape. "Looks like you're coming with us after all," the man in the hoodie said, his voice dripping with malice. I backed up until I hit the side of my car, my mind racing. There was no way out. I fumbled for my phone, but before I could do anything, one of them lunged at me. I ducked just in time, darting around the car and making a break for the gas station. The door slammed behind me as I rushed inside, breathless. The old man was still there, standing behind the counter, his expression as cold and detached as ever. "Help me!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "They're out there! Call the cops!" The old man's eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of pity, or maybe it was just amusement. Slowly he reached under the counter, pulling out something wrapped in cloth. He unrolled it to reveal a set of car keys. "My keys," I whispered, realization dawning on me. "You had them the whole time?" The old man said nothing, just placed the keys on the counter and nodded toward the door. "Better go, before they catch you." I grabbed the keys and bolted for the door, my mind spinning. Was this some kind of sick game? I didn't have time to think about it. I sprinted to my car, jammed the key into the ignition, and peeled out of the lot, not daring to look back. As I sped down the empty road, my phone buzzed again. It was another text from Rob. "Man, we set you up good. Did you like the surprise?" I stared at the message, my hands trembling. Rob had planned this. Was it all just some twisted prank? But then I saw something in the rearview mirror, those same shadowy figures standing at the edge of the road, watching me drive away. I was on my way back from a work trip, driving through the back roads of a rural town that barely showed up on maps. It was late, past midnight, and I had been on the road for hours. The highway was quiet, desolate even, with only the distant glow of headlights breaking the oppressive darkness. When my fuel gauge dipped below empty, I cursed under my breath. I hadn't seen a gas station for miles. I kept driving, hoping I'd come across something soon, but the road stretched on in eerie silence. Just as I was about to give up and pull over, I spotted the faint neon glow of a gas station sign in the distance. It was old, one of those weathered, dilapidated places that looked like it hadn't seen customers in years. Still, I had no choice. My car was gasping for fuel, and I wasn't about to get stranded in the middle of nowhere. I pulled into the station, the tires crunching on the gravel. The building itself was a single story, barely held together, with a flickering open sign hanging in the window. The lights above the pumps buzzed, casting long shadows across the lot. The station was surrounded by trees on all sides, so dense that they swallowed any light beyond the property. I parked by one of the pumps and got out, noticing how unnaturally still everything felt. No wind, no crickets, just an uncomfortable, pressing silence. When I tried to pay at the pump, the screen blinked, but nothing happened. Great, I'd have to go inside. I glanced at the station's door. It was barely hanging on its hinges, with a single light flickering inside. The inside of the station wasn't any better. Dusty shelves held old snacks and newspapers that hadn't been touched in what looked like years. Behind the counter, an old man sat slouched on a stool, his head drooping as though he was asleep. "Hey, I need to fill up," I called out, my voice echoing unnervingly in the small space. The man didn't move. I stepped closer to the counter, my eyes scanning the rest of the station. A chill crept up my spine, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The air was stale, the light dim and yellow, casting everything in a sickly glow. The man still didn't react, not even a twitch. "Hey," I said again, louder this time. His head snapped up suddenly and I jumped back. His eyes locked onto mine, wide, bloodshot, and empty. His skin was ashen, sagging, and his mouth twisted into something resembling a smile, though it looked forced, unnatural. "Pump's broken," he rasped in a voice that sounded like sandpaper scraping against metal. Yeah," I stammered. "I need to fill up. Is there a way to turn it on from here?" He blinked slowly, his mouth hanging open for a moment before he reached under the counter and pressed a button. "Go ahead," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I gave him a quick nod and turned to leave, eager to get back to the safety of my car. As I reached the door, I glanced back at him, and my heart nearly stopped. He was staring at me, unblinking, his eyes following my every movement. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my skin like a slap. I tried to shake off the unease and walk to my car. The pump was working now, the gas slowly ticking into my tank. That's when I noticed something strange. The windows of the station were dirty, grimy even, but I could still make out the old man's silhouette behind the counter. He hadn't moved, but his head was turned, still watching me through the window. My skin crawled, but I told myself to relax. It was late, I was tired, and I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the pump clicked, signaling that my tank was full, I hastily replaced the nozzle and got back into my car. I glanced at the station one last time before starting the engine. The man was gone. I stared at the empty counter, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't heard him leave his seat. I hadn't seen him move. Where did he go? Without waiting for an answer, I threw the car into gear and sped out of the lot. The trees swallowed the station behind me as I drove down the highway, my mind racing with uneasy thoughts. 5 minutes passed, and I finally started to relax, the hum of the engine and the steady line of the road calming me down. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something in the rearview mirror. A figure. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop on the empty road. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing behind me. The road was empty. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I took a few deep breaths. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. I was exhausted, and the gas station had put me on edge, that was all. I put the car back in drive and continued down the road, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. But it wasn't long before I saw it again. A figure, standing in the middle of the road up ahead. I slammed on the brakes again, my headlights illuminating the figure. It was the old man from the gas station, standing perfectly still, his eyes locked on mine. My blood ran cold. I blinked, and he was gone. I sat frozen in my car, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew what I had seen. He was there. He was watching me. I floored the gas pedal, speeding down the highway as fast as I could. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away. But no matter how fast I went, the feeling didn't leave me. He was still watching. And somehow, I knew he always would be. The night was deep and moonless, the kind of darkness that swallows everything whole. I had just finished a long day at work, and the solitude of my drive home felt liberating. I took the back roads to avoid the usual rush-hour traffic, which gave me the chance to clear my mind. But as I drove, the scenery turned from familiar to eerie, with tall trees looming on either side of the road, their branches casting strange shadows on my windshield. My car hummed along the asphalt, and I flipped through the radio stations, hoping to find something to accompany the quiet. After a while, the low fuel light flickered to life. Of course, just my luck. I had thought I could make it home, but I was going to have to stop at a gas station. It wasn't long before I spotted a faint glow in the distance, a small gas station, its neon lights flickering like a beacon in the dark. I pulled in, the tires crunching over the gravel as I parked next to one of the pumps. The station looked older than I expected, with peeling paint and a few rusting signs hanging askew. Still, I was relieved to find it open. As I stepped out of my car, a chill swept over me. The air felt heavier, as if it carried an unspoken tension. I shrugged it off, attributing it to fatigue, and made my way to the pump. I filled my tank and glanced around. The lot was empty, save for one other vehicle, a large black SUV parked near the entrance of the store. I hesitated, staring at the SUV. It seemed out of place, especially considering the worn-down appearance of the gas station. As I finished pumping gas, I noticed the driver's side door of the SUV open, and a figure emerged. He was a tall man, dressed in a dark hoodie that obscured his face. He looked toward me for a moment before disappearing inside the store. A knot formed in my stomach. Something about him felt wrong. Maybe it was the way he moved or the intensity with which he had looked at me. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and headed inside to pay. The convenience store was dimly lit and eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights flickering above. The cashier was an older woman, her hair frizzy and gray. She barely acknowledged me as I approached. "Just the gas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. $30.50, she replied, her voice monotone. I handed her the cash and glanced outside. The man in the hoodie was now standing by his SUV, looking in my direction. I quickly turned back to the cashier, my heart racing for no apparent reason. "Is everything okay?" I asked, hoping for some reassurance. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and slightly unfocused. "It's a strange night," she muttered, almost to herself. "Strange things happen around here." "What do you mean?" I pressed, suddenly interested. "Just be careful on the road," she said cryptically, handing me my change. "People don't always leave when they should." I nodded, unsure of what to say, and stepped back outside. The night air hit me, cold and sharp. I hurried to my car, glancing back at the SUV. The man was now inside, but his headlights were off, leaving the lot in shadow. As I climbed back into my car, I felt an unsettling urge to leave as quickly as possible. I put the keys in the ignition and pulled out of the gas station, glancing in the rearview mirror. The SUV was still there, but I couldn't see the driver anymore. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. I turned the radio back on, trying to distract myself from the strange encounter. As I drove, the eerie quiet of the night crept back in, enveloping me like a thick fog. About 20 minutes into my drive, I noticed headlights approaching from behind. I glanced in the mirror, and to my shock, it was the same black SUV. My pulse quickened as the vehicle closed the distance. Was I just being paranoid, or was he following me? I turned up the speed, my heart racing. The SUV was relentless, tailing me closely. Every time I glanced back, I could see the imposing shape of the vehicle looming behind me. I took a sharp turn onto a less traveled road, hoping to lose him in the twists and turns. But the SUV didn't relent. It was right there, its headlights blaring as it mirrored my every move. Panic surged through me. My mind raced with questions. Why was he following me? What did he want? I had to get away. In a moment of desperation, I spotted a small dirt road leading off into the woods. I veered off, hoping to create enough distance. The trees closed in around me as I drove deeper into the darkness, branches scraping against the sides of my car. The SUV's headlights followed me into the trees, cutting through the night like a knife. I drove further down the dirt road, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to find a place to hide, to escape this nightmare. But the road ended abruptly at a small clearing. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the gravel. I turned off the engine and sat in silence, listening intently. The night was still except for the distant sound of the SUV's engine. It was close, too close. I held my breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The SUV's headlights cut through the trees, illuminating the clearing. I ducked down in my seat, hoping to remain hidden. I could hear the engine rev, and then it fell silent. My heart raced as I waited, terrified. A few moments passed, and then I heard a door slam. The sound echoed through the trees, and I felt a chill wash over me. I risked a glance up, peering through the windshield. The figure from the SUV was standing outside, scanning the area. My throat tightened as I watched him move slowly, purposefully, his head tilting slightly as if he were listening. He was searching for me, I realized with dread. I had to get out of here. I quietly reached for my phone, hoping against hope that I had a signal. I didn't, no bars. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. There was no way to call for help. The figure was getting closer, and I had to act fast. I took a deep breath and decided to try and make a run for it. The trees surrounding me felt like a labyrinth, and if I could just get far enough away, I might be able to lose him. I opened the door slowly, making sure it didn't creak, and slipped out into the night. The darkness enveloped me as I crouched low and moved silently through the underbrush. I could hear the man moving, the crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot as he wandered closer to my car. I kept moving, my heart pounding in my ears, wishing I had thought this through better. Suddenly, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the area around me. I froze, panic surging. The man was searching for me, and I was running out of time. I turned and bolted deeper into the woods, branches scraping against my arms as I pushed through the underbrush. The flashlight beam followed, casting shadows that danced ominously across the trees. I could hear him calling out, his voice low and taunting. "You can't hide from me," he shouted, the sound echoing through the night. "I know you're out there." My lungs burned as I ran, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I had to find a way out. I stumbled through the trees, desperate for an opening. In the distance, I could see a faint light. Was it a house? A cabin? Anything that could provide refuge. With renewed hope, I pushed forward, ignoring the pain in my legs and the sharp branches that clawed at my skin. The light grew closer, but so did the man's voice. I could hear him moving closer, his footsteps crashing through the underbrush like thunder. Just as I reached the edge of the clearing, I caught sight of an old cabin, its windows dark, but a warm glow flickered within. I raced toward it, adrenaline fueling my every step. The door was slightly ajar and I pushed it open, stumbling inside. The interior was musty and dim, filled with the smell of old wood and decay. I quickly closed the door behind me, heart racing as I pressed my back against it, listening intently. I could hear the man approaching, his voice growing louder. "Where are you hiding?" he called out, his tone mocking. "You can't escape me forever." I quickly scanned the room for somewhere to hide. A staircase spiraled upward and I darted toward it, praying he wouldn't find me. I crept up the stairs, moving as silently as I could. At the top I found a small attic space filled with old boxes and dusty furniture. I squeezed into a corner, hiding behind an old trunk, my heart pounding in my chest. I held my breath, straining to listen. The man entered the cabin, his footsteps echoing in the silence. I could hear him moving around, searching. He kicked a chair over, the sound sending a jolt of fear through me. "Where are you?" he taunted. "I just want to play." The attic felt suffocating as I waited, fear and adrenaline coursing through me. I glanced around, hoping for some way out, but the only exit was back down the stairs. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. My heart sank as I listened closely. The cabin was silent. Had he left? I waited a few minutes, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, I summoned the courage to peek out from behind the trunk. My breath caught in my throat as I saw him standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at me, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "There you are," he said, his voice low and sinister. "I thought you'd never come out." Panic surged through me as I scrambled back into my hiding place, pressing myself against the wall. I had to think fast. I could hear him moving again, his footsteps creeping up the stairs. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed a heavy old box next to me and lifted it, preparing to defend myself if he reached me. But instead of moving toward me, he stopped at the attic entrance. "Come on out," he called, his voice dripping with mockery. "I promise I won't hurt you, much." I could hear him moving again, the creaking of floorboards as he searched the small space. I felt my pulse quicken, my grip tightening on the box. I had to be ready. Suddenly he stopped moving, and for a moment there was silence. My heart pounded as I listened, praying he would just give up and leave. But then I heard him laugh softly. "I know you're in there. It's just a matter of time before I find you." In a burst of adrenaline, I prepared to throw the box at him if he got too close. But then I heard something different, a faint sound, like a car engine revving in the distance. It was a sound I hadn't expected. Relief washed over me as I realized it might be my chance. Perhaps someone else was on the road, someone who could help. Suddenly, the man shouted angrily, "You think you can just run away? You're mine!" He moved closer, and I knew I had to act quickly. I pushed myself against the wall, preparing for the worst. Just as he stepped toward me, I launched the box with all my strength, hitting him square in the chest. He stumbled back, and I seized the moment to bolt past him, racing down the stairs and out of the cabin. I could hear him cursing behind me, but I didn't look back. The car engine roared louder as I reached the edge of the clearing, and I spotted headlights cutting through the darkness. I ran toward them, praying it was someone who could help me. As I burst onto the road, a car skidded to a stop in front of me. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a middle-aged man with a concerned look on his face. "Are you okay?" "Get in," he shouted, and without a second thought, I leaped into the passenger seat. "Drive, he's after me," I gasped, breathless and terrified. The man didn't hesitate. He slammed the gas pedal, and we took off down the road. I turned back to see the cabin fading into the darkness, the man standing at the edge, his figure disappearing behind the trees. The weight of the night finally began to lift as we sped away from that hellish place. I was still shaken, but I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was safe for now, but the memory of that chase would haunt me forever, a reminder that some encounters are more than just a fleeting scare. They're the beginning of something far more sinister. The driver glanced at me, concern etched on his face. "What happened back there?" I opened my mouth to explain, but I realized the words wouldn't come. The night felt heavy with unsaid fears, and for the first time I understood the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of the light. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, miserable drizzle that made everything feel like it was soaked in gloom. I had been driving for what felt like an eternity down an empty stretch of highway, hoping to make it to my friend's cabin before dark. But I was tired, my eyelids heavy, and my gas tank was dangerously close to empty. When I saw the faint glow of a gas station sign in the distance, I let out a relieved sigh. The place looked small and run down, one of those old stations that probably hadn't seen a renovation in decades. But it was the only sign of life I'd seen for miles. I pulled into the station, my tires crunching on the gravel. The place looked almost deserted. A single pump sat in front of a small, dimly lit building. There were no other cars, no one behind the counter inside, and only the occasional flicker of the neon open sign suggested any business was still happening here. I climbed out of my car, pulling my jacket tighter against the cold, damp air. I swiped my card at the pump, but it didn't seem to work. Of course, I would have to go inside. Just as I turned toward the building, I saw someone standing at the edge of the parking lot. He was standing still, as if he had been there the entire time, and the rain poured down around him, soaking his clothes. He was young, probably mid-20s, with a backpack slung over his shoulder. His long hair hung wet against his face, and he looked tired, like someone who had been on the road for too long. Hitchhiker, I thought to myself. He must have gotten stuck in this rain. He waved at me, his hand moving slowly through the misty air. For a moment I considered just ignoring him, filling up my tank and getting back on the road. But something about his expression, lost, a bit desperate, made me reconsider. I walked over to him, still keeping my distance, my voice raised above the rain. "You all right, man?" He nodded, his face pale under the dim lights. "Been stuck here for a while. No one's come by. You headed anywhere close?" "Just passing through," I replied. "But I can give you a ride a little ways up the road if you need it." He smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "I'd appreciate that. You're the first car I've seen tonight." It struck me as odd, but I shrugged it off. This stretch of road was desolate, especially in weather like this. I gestured toward my car, and he followed without another word. We climbed inside, the rain pelting the windshield in thick sheets. I flicked on the heat to get rid of the chill in the air, but even then, it still felt cold. As we pulled away from the gas station, the hitchhiker sat quietly beside me, staring straight ahead. I tried to make conversation, but his responses were brief, almost as if he was lost in thought or somewhere else entirely. "Where are you heading?" I asked after a few minutes of silence. He shrugged, his gaze still fixed on the road ahead. "Just trying to get out of here. Been stuck for a long time." There was something off about the way he said it, a kind of heaviness in his voice that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced at him, but he didn't seem interested in talking any further. His clothes, still wet from the rain, hadn't dried much in the warmth of the car, and his pale face was illuminated in the dim glow of the dashboard. As the miles passed, the uneasy feeling only grew. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Finally, I broke the silence again. "So, where exactly were you heading when you got stranded?" He paused for a long time before answering. "I was supposed to meet someone, but I never made it." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine, and I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. I was about to press him further when something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. The gas station. We were passing it again. "What the hell?" I muttered, glancing back at the road. I had been driving straight, there were no turns, no intersections, but somehow we had circled back to the gas station. The hitchhiker didn't seem surprised. In fact, he didn't react at all. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, his expression vacant. I swallowed hard, trying to keep calm. That's weird. I swear I've been going straight this whole time. Doesn't matter, he said softly. It always brings you back. I turned to look at him, confusion and fear creeping into my mind. What do you mean? He finally turned to face me, his eyes hollow and dark. I've been trying to leave for years, but I can't. No one can. My heart pounded as his words sank in, and suddenly the car felt suffocating, like the air was being sucked out of the space between us. The temperature had dropped, and I could see my breath fogging up the windshield. The hitchhiker's face was growing paler, almost translucent in the dim light, his wet clothes clinging to a frame that seemed impossibly thin. I slammed on the brakes, my car screeching to a stop in the middle of the road. I turned to the hitchhiker, ready to tell him to get out, but he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. I sat there in stunned silence, my heart racing, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The rain continued to beat against the roof of the car, the windshield wipers cutting through the fog that had now crept up the glass. I turned slowly back toward the gas station, dreading what I might see. And there, standing under the dim glow of the station's flickering lights, was the hitchhiker. He was staring at me, his figure drenched in rain, his face as pale and lifeless as before. He raised his hand in a slow wave, just like he had when I first saw him. I hit the gas, tires screeching as I sped away from that place, not stopping until I was miles down the road. I didn't look back, didn't dare check the rearview mirror again. The only thing I knew was that I had to keep going no matter what. I never saw that gas station again. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving down an empty road, I think about that hitchhiker. I think about what he said, that no one could leave. And I wonder if, somehow, he's still there, waiting for the next driver to come along. The clock on the gas station wall flickered as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the empty aisles. I leaned against the counter, watching the clock tick slowly toward midnight. The shift had dragged on longer than I had anticipated. The night was dead, no customers, no cars passing by, just the low hum of the cooler and the rustle of the wind outside. I had taken this job at the gas station to pay the bills while I finished my degree, and it seemed harmless enough. Located on a desolate stretch of road outside town, the station catered mostly to late-night travelers and the occasional local stopping for snacks or fuel. But as I glanced out at the dark road, I felt a familiar twinge of unease. It was just past 10 when the ambulance pulled into the lot, its lights flashing but siren silent. My heart raced as I straightened up, forcing a smile on my face. The two paramedics hopped out, their faces drawn and serious. "Hey there," one of them called out, a tall woman with dark hair tied in a tight bun. "Can we fill up the ambulance?" "Sure," I replied, trying to mask my curiosity. What happened? A call came in. The other paramedic, a burly man with a grizzled beard, said as he flipped the gas nozzle open. "A bad accident a few miles down the road. We're just refueling before heading back." I nodded, the pit in my stomach deepening. I had heard of the accidents that sometimes happened on that stretch of highway. The dark woods lining the road seemed to swallow vehicles whole, leaving only wreckage behind. As they filled up, I tried to keep the conversation light. "You guys see a lot of action out here?" The woman chuckled softly. "More than you'd think, especially at night. Just be careful if you're out there. The roads can get crazy." Their words hung in the air as they finished up and climbed back into the ambulance. I watched as they drove off, their lights flashing in the dark, disappearing down the road. I tried to shake off the chill creeping up my spine, but felt it linger. With only the occasional sound of a car passing, I tried to distract myself by cleaning the counter and rearranging the snack display. A few minutes turned into an hour, and the stillness was almost suffocating. I glanced out the window and noticed the shadows shifting outside, but it was just the trees swaying in the breeze. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash that made my heart jump. I rushed to the window, peering into the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a man standing in the middle of the road, arms raised as if he was trying to signal someone. My first thought was to call the police, but my gut told me to check on him instead. Grabbing a flashlight, I hesitated for a moment before stepping out into the night. The cool air wrapped around me like a shroud as I made my way to the edge of the road, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Hey, are you okay?" I shouted, my voice shaky. The man didn't respond, just stood there swaying slightly, illuminated by the light. His clothes were tattered, and I could see streaks of something dark on his shirt. A chill ran down my spine as I approached. As I got closer, I noticed the look on his face, distorted and wide-eyed, as if he had just witnessed something horrific. "What happened?" I asked again, this time more softly. "Help," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "They're coming. I can't let them find me." A sense of dread washed over me. "Who's coming?" I pressed, stepping forward, trying to grasp what was happening. Suddenly he stumbled back, eyes darting around as if he were being chased by unseen horrors. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. He wasn't just scared, he was terrified, like a cornered animal. "Get inside, now," he shouted suddenly, panic rising in his voice. I hesitated for a second, glancing back toward the gas station. "Please, you have to listen," he yelled, eyes wild. "They'll get you too." That's when I heard it, a distant rumble, like thunder echoing in the distance. I turned back to the man, heart racing. "What's coming?" "I don't know, just get inside," he pleaded, voice cracking. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something held me there, rooted to the spot. Before I could respond, I heard it again, louder this time, the sound of metal grinding against metal. My blood ran cold as I turned my head toward the sound. I caught a glimpse of headlights piercing through the trees on the opposite side of the road. "Go, now," he yelled, breaking me from my stupor. I took a step back, and before I could process what was happening, I sprinted toward the gas station. The man's cries echoed in my ears as I reached the door, slamming it shut behind me and locking it tight. I leaned against the door, breathless, heart pounding. I glanced through the window, catching sight of the approaching headlights. They were coming fast, and before I could brace myself, a dark SUV came barreling into the parking lot, tires screeching as it skidded to a stop. The engine roared, and the doors swung open. "Get down!" I heard someone shout from the vehicle. Two figures jumped out, their faces obscured by the shadows. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the flashlight tightly. The man from the road rushed to the SUV, hands waving frantically. "Please, you have to help me. Get in, hurry," one of the figures shouted, glancing nervously over their shoulder. I watched as the man dove into the vehicle, slamming the door just as I heard another sound, a loud crash from the direction of the woods. I peered through the glass, my heart in my throat, as a large, dark shape burst through the trees. It was massive, something that shouldn't exist, an abomination of twisted limbs and bloodied fur. The SUV's engine roared to life again, and the figures inside looked frantic, eyes wide with terror. They didn't wait. The driver slammed the gas pedal, sending the vehicle flying down the road, tires spinning. But then the thing in the woods was moving too, faster than I could comprehend. It lunged for the SUV, but it was too late. They were gone, swallowed by the darkness. My breath hitched in my throat as I realized I was alone again. I could still hear the echoes of their screams, the rush of wind as they tore down the road, leaving me here in the gas station, trapped in the suffocating silence. A cold sweat coated my skin as I turned back to the door, glancing through the glass. The road was empty now, but I could still feel the weight of that presence lingering in the air. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to drive away, but the thought of getting in my car felt like a death sentence. Instead, I grabbed my phone and dialed, trembling as I waited for the line to connect. "What's your emergency?" The operator's voice came through, calm and steady. There's something in the woods. A man was just here. He was running from something." My words tumbled out in a frantic rush. "Calm down, ma'am. Can you tell me your location?" I glanced at the gas station sign. "I'm at the gas station on Route 15, but..." Suddenly I heard a loud thump against the door, cutting me off. I froze, my breath hitching. "Are you there?" the operator asked. "What was that noise?" "I don't know. Someone's trying to get in," I cried, backing away from the door, heart racing. "Stay calm. Lock all the doors and find a safe place to hide," the operator instructed, but it felt futile. Another thump echoed, followed by a deep growl that reverberated through the glass. I turned and bolted toward the back of the station, searching for a place to hide, the operator's voice still echoing in my mind. I found a small storage room and slipped inside, shutting the door behind me. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I sank to the floor, trying to steady my breath. "Stay on the line," the operator said, but I had dropped my phone. I could only listen as the world outside descended into chaos. The thumping grew louder, relentless, as if something was determined to break in. I pressed my ear against the door, listening intently, heart racing. I could hear it breathing, low and ragged, a sound that sent chills racing down my spine. Suddenly there was a loud crash, and the door to the gas station flew open. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it wouldn't find me. The growling intensified, and I could hear the sound of heavy footsteps moving through the aisles, knocking over displays and sending cans rolling across the floor. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense, frozen in fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. Silence fell over the gas station, thick and suffocating. I opened my eyes, straining to hear anything, but all I could hear was the faint thudding of my heart. Slowly, I crept to the door, heart pounding in my chest as I grasped the handle and peered out. The aisle was empty, the flickering lights casting long shadows across the floor. With no sign of the creature, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it had gone, or maybe the ambulance crew had scared it off. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage, and stepped back into the main area of the station. But as I did, I heard a low growl echoing from the back of the station. My heart sank. It hadn't left, it was still here. I turned to run back into the storage room, but before I could make it, the door burst open, and there it stood, twisted and grotesque, with eyes that glowed in the dim light. I screamed as I stumbled back, but the creature lunged at me, its breath hot and rancid. I turned and ran, adrenaline surging as I sprinted toward the front of the station. I could feel it behind me, chasing me down the aisles, knocking over anything in its path. "Please, no," I yelled, pushing through the glass door and bursting outside into the cool night air. I could see my car parked in the lot, but the creature was closing in fast. I fumbled with my keys, heart racing as I turned to see the thing lunging at me, jaws open wide. I scrambled into the car just in time, slamming the door shut and locking it tight. I turned the ignition, the engine roaring to life as I glanced back at the gas station. The creature stood at the entrance, silhouetted against the flickering lights, watching me. I didn't wait for it to come any closer. I slammed the gear into reverse and backed out of the lot, tires screeching as I sped away, the gas station disappearing into the darkness behind me. As I drove down the road, I could still feel the weight of its gaze on my back, a dark promise lingering in the night. I glanced at my rearview mirror, but there was nothing, just the endless stretch of road ahead and the quiet hum of the engine. In that moment, I knew I would never return to that gas station again. The midnight stop had become a nightmare, a place where darkness lurked, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. The midnight air was crisp as I pulled into the small, dimly lit gas station off the interstate. My headlights swept across the cracked pavement, illuminating the rusting gas pumps that stood like sentinels in the darkness. I'd been driving for hours, my eyelids heavy with fatigue, and I desperately needed a break. As I parked, I noticed a weathered pickup truck idling at the far end of the lot. Its engine rumbled softly, and the driver, a burly man with a thick beard and a trucker cap, sat hunched over the wheel, casting furtive glances my way. I felt a chill race down my spine, but shrugged it off as paranoia. I stepped out of my car, the chill of the night air wrapping around me as I made my way toward the entrance. The gas station's flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the assortment of snacks and drinks lining the shelves. "Can I help you?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. It was the cashier, an older woman with tired eyes who looked like she had seen too many nights like this one. "Just filling up," I replied, forcing a smile. I could still feel the trucker's gaze lingering on me, an unsettling presence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Be careful out there," she said, her voice low. "This stretch of road has its fair share of crazies." I nodded, trying to laugh off her warning. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." I made my way outside to the pumps, filling my tank while casting furtive glances at the trucker, who still sat in his truck, eyes locked on me. As I finished pumping gas, he stepped out, his bulk towering over me as he approached. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice gravelly, like he had swallowed a handful of gravel. I felt a wave of unease wash over me. "No, I'm fine, thanks." I forced myself to meet his gaze, trying to ignore the knot tightening in my stomach. He stepped closer, invading my space. "You sure? It can get dangerous out here at night. A pretty girl like you shouldn't be alone." A chill ran down my spine, and I took a step back, feeling vulnerable under his scrutiny. "I really appreciate it, but I'm just fine." The trucker's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Suit yourself, but if you need anything, I'll be right here." He gestured toward his truck before shuffling back, the tires of his boots crunching against the gravel. I hurriedly finished pumping gas and made my way back to my car, heart racing. I could feel his eyes on me as I got in, locking the doors immediately. I glanced back at the gas station, hoping the cashier was watching, hoping she could sense the tension hanging in the air. As I pulled out of the lot, I kept my eyes on the road, trying to shake off the dread that had settled over me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my heart dropped. The truck was following me, headlights illuminating the dark stretch of road behind me. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. He was probably headed to the same place, but the longer I drove, the more my stomach twisted with anxiety. The road stretched endlessly ahead, surrounded by dense woods on either side, isolating me in the dark. I increased my speed, adrenaline coursing through me as I clutched the steering wheel. The truck's headlights loomed closer, and my pulse quickened. I turned onto a winding back road, desperate to lose him, but his truck was relentless, tailing me with an unnerving determination. I took a deep breath, heart racing as I glanced at the speedometer. I was driving too fast. I needed to calm down. I slowed down slightly, but the trucker matched my pace, still hovering in my rearview mirror like a shadow. I spotted a turnoff up ahead and took it, praying for a way out. The dirt road was rough, jostling my car as I bounced along. The trees closed in around me, the darkness swallowing the last remnants of the gas station's light. I dared to look back and saw the truck had followed me, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Panic surged within me. I pressed the accelerator harder, feeling the car lurch forward. I had to lose him. I twisted the wheel, weaving through the trees, my breath coming in quick gasps. The truck's engine roared behind me, unyielding and powerful. The sound of its tires crunching on the gravel sent shivers down my spine. I could feel the weight of his gaze on my back, a predator stalking its prey. Just as I thought I might lose him, the dirt road opened up to a clearing, revealing an old abandoned shack. I had no choice. I needed a place to hide. I pulled into the clearing, the car's tires kicking up dirt and leaves as I parked behind the shack. I turned off the engine, the silence pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. I held my breath, listening intently. The rumble of the truck's engine grew closer, the headlights sweeping across the clearing. "Come on," I whispered to myself, praying he wouldn't find me. The truck came to a stop just outside the clearing, the engine cutting off. I could see the silhouette of the driver through the windshield, sitting there for what felt like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest as I crouched low in my seat, peering through the cracked glass. I watched as the trucker climbed out, the moonlight catching the glint of something metallic in his hand. Fear gripped me as I realized it was a flashlight. He walked toward the shack, illuminating the area as he moved. "I know you're out here," he called, his voice echoing in the stillness. "You can't hide from me." My breath hitched, panic clawing at my throat. I pressed myself further down in my seat, praying he wouldn't look in my direction. I felt so small, so helpless. The weight of the darkness pressed in, making me feel trapped. The trucker circled the shack, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows as he searched for me. "You shouldn't have run away. This will only make things worse for you," he taunted, his voice dripping with menace. I glanced at my phone, heart sinking as I saw I had no signal. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was utterly alone, with no way to call for help. In a moment of desperation, I quietly opened the door and slipped out of the car, careful to keep my footsteps silent. I had to find a way to escape. I crouched low, heart racing as I moved around the back of the shack, trying to put as much distance between myself and the trucker as possible. The night was still, but I could hear him moving around the front, calling out taunts that made my skin crawl. I scanned the area, looking for anything I could use as a weapon or a means of escape. The shack was decrepit, and the woods were thick, but there had to be something. Just then, I heard the sound of his footsteps approaching. I darted behind a tree, pressing myself against the rough bark, praying he wouldn't see me. "Where are you?" he called, voice low and sinister. "You can't run forever. I just want to talk." A knot of dread twisted in my stomach. I watched as he moved closer, flashlight beam sweeping through the trees, illuminating the underbrush. "I just want to make sure you're safe," he said mockingly. "You shouldn't be out here all alone. It's dangerous." I gritted my teeth, heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't let him find me. As he stepped closer, I saw my chance. I crouched low and moved around the tree, making my way deeper into the woods. With each step, I felt the cool night air against my skin, the darkness swallowing me whole. I pushed through the branches, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I could still hear him behind me, his footsteps crunching on the leaves, his taunts echoing in the stillness. "Just give up. You can't hide," he shouted, laughter bubbling in his voice. I pressed on, fear driving me deeper into the woods. I had to find a way out, a way to escape. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a small stream, the water glistening under the moonlight. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. If I could follow the stream, maybe it would lead me back to the road. I crouched low, moving quietly along the bank, trying to stay hidden as the sound of his voice faded behind me. But then, just as I thought I was safe, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me. My heart dropped as I turned, catching a glimpse of him emerging from the trees, eyes wild with rage. "There you are," he shouted, charging toward me, the flashlight beam swinging wildly. "You can't get away." Panic surged within me as I turned and ran, sprinting along the bank as fast as my legs would carry me. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, the sound of his footsteps growing closer. I could feel the water splashing around my feet as I hurried along the stream, the cold biting at my skin. I pushed myself harder, heart racing, adrenaline fueling my escape. Just as I thought I could outrun him, I tripped on a rock and went tumbling into the water, cold shock wrapping around me as I gasped for breath. I scrambled to my feet, shivering and soaked, but I couldn't stop. I kept running, the sound of the water muffling my cries as I raced against time. I could see a glimmer of light in the distance, a sign of civilization, and I pushed forward with renewed determination. Finally, I broke through the trees and stumbled onto the road, gasping for breath as I waved down a passing car. The headlights blinded me as the driver slammed on the brakes, rushing to my side. "What happened?" they shouted, but all I could do was point back toward the woods, fear choking my words. "Please, help. There's a man. He's trying to get me." The driver jumped out, eyes wide with concern. "Get in, we need to go." I didn't hesitate. I climbed into the car, heart racing as I locked the door. As the driver sped away, I glanced back toward the woods, the darkness swallowing everything behind me. The trucker's laughter echoed in my ears, but I was finally safe, the gas station nightmare left behind in the shadows. The road stretched ahead, a promise of safety, but I knew I would never forget the terror of that night. I had escaped, but the memory of the last stop would linger, a chilling reminder of how close I had come to losing everything.